New leader, same concerns. The new Secret Service director answers questions on yet another embarrassing incident. Pivotal election. Israelis vote for a new prime minister and parliament today. Parties and prayers. St. Patrick's Day is secularized by society. We look at the saint behind the celebration. And confession? There's an app for that. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 17th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Heartbreaking. That's how one lawmaker describes the downfall of the Secret Service. That agency's new director went before a House committee today answering some tough questions. On top of embarrassing security breaches, there are new allegations of drunken behavior. Susanne LaFrankie has more from the White House tonight.
Brian, members of a House panel overseeing the Secret Service budget want, quote, heads to roll. Representatives challenge the agency to return to its former respected role as protector of the president and the first family.
Drinking, carousing, on and off duty.
Both Republicans and Democrats are angry and frustrated. They demanded answers from Director Joseph Clancy before approving his agency's $1.9 billion budget.
You are an agency that were considered heroes, that protected every president, no matter what party they were in.
Lawmakers want reassurances that last week's alleged drunken driving crash at the White House will end the string of embarrassing, dangerous antics. Two senior Secret Service officers ran a government car into a security barricade last week as they were responding to a report of a suspicious package. Clancy defended his handling of the incident.
The president, the first family, they're safe. We've moved these individuals to non-supervisory positions rather than administrative leave where they're getting paid for no work.
Lawmakers told Clancy he needed to show leadership and fire the agents.
You can't run an agency like this, for God's sakes, or any other agency, unless you have discipline in the ranks.
Clancy used to be part of the Obama security detail and is trusted by the president and first lady. But his recent appointment has drawn criticism from some in Congress who think an outsider should take over the agency. One Democrat said recent behavior by some agents has dishonored the Secret Service.
Whether you're on duty or off duty, you cannot get so inebriated. It is not accepted that you're capable of taking a car and going into a fence or killing someone on the street. These are people with guns.
The investigation has been turned over to the Inspector General's office. Until the inquiry is complete, the agents will remain reassigned to desk jobs outside the White House and can't be fired. Secret Service Director Clancy also asked for an additional $8 million to build a replica White House. He said it would help better train agents. Brian?
Susanne LaFrankie at the White House. Thank you. A bill to provide help for victims of human trafficking stalls in the Senate today. Senate Republicans accused Democrats of blocking the legislation to create a fund for human trafficking victims. Democrats object to a provision added to the bill that would block federal funding of abortion. House Republicans released their budget plan today, their first since taking control of both houses of Congress. The $3.8 trillion plan would repeal Obamacare. It would transition Medicare to a voucher-like program by 2024 and turn Medicaid over to the states. It also allocates $94 billion for the global war on terror, nearly double what the president wants. House leaders hope the budget will appease Republicans in the Senate who want more defense spending. They claim the plan balances the budget within 10 years. However, it's unlikely to pass the Senate, even more unlikely to be signed by the president. House Speaker John Boehner wants former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to turn over her entire email server. He says a neutral third party should decide which emails pertain to her official work and which are personal. But the chair of the committee investigating Benghazi is giving her 2 more weeks to present emails related to an attack on that consulate. Congressman Trey Gowdy says Clinton has until March 27th to comply with a congressional subpoena. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Iran's president says he is optimistic a nuclear deal with the West can be reached. He spoke as Secretary of State John Kerry and Iran's foreign minister continue talks in Switzerland. The head of Iran's nuclear program told reporters he thinks a deal is possible by the deadline set for the end of this month. U.S. officials expressed caution, though, saying there are still key differences to be resolved. Dozens of Republican senators oppose any deal. They insist that Iran's government cannot be trusted. Israelis vote for a new parliament today. The fate of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hangs in the balance. Jason Calvi joining us now with more on that.
Brian, Prime Minister Netanyahu is fighting to stay in power after 6 years in office. Unlike here in the U.S., Israeli voters vote for a party, not a candidate. The 120 seats in parliament are then given out based on the percentage of votes each party receives. A national holiday in Israel, as voters pick one of 25 parties. Benjamin Netanyahu makes a last-ditch appeal for his party.
The right regime is in danger. The Arab voters are coming in huge amounts to the polls. The leftists are bringing them in huge amounts to polls using buses.
Two of Netanyahu's rivals have criticized those comments. The latest poll shows a large number of undecided voters, with Netanyahu's party trailing the Zionist Union and their leader, Isaac Herzog.
What I run for is the following: social justice. I will change the nature of the division of wealth in a fairer and more balanced way.
Like Netanyahu, Herzog says he won't accept a nuclear-armed Iran, but the two politicians are divided on Palestine.
I will do my best to ignite a political process with our Palestinian neighbors.
Netanyahu now says he won't allow the creation of a Palestinian state and warns that Herzog's party will give too much away.
They want to give up. We want to defend. They want to divide Jerusalem. We want Jerusalem to be united.
The polls are now closed. The country's TV stations' exit numbers show a very tight race. Two have it tied, and a third gives Netanyahu's party a one-seat lead. But we won't know who will become prime minister for weeks. That's because the parties will negotiate between themselves until one can create the needed coalition. Brian?
Thanks, Jason. James Philiips is a senior research fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, didn't Netanyahu actually call for this election himself, and why would he do that?
Well, he called for it back in December when polls showed that he would be an easy winner, but as in politics here in this country, things can change very quickly, and the trends became much more adverse for him, and going into the election, he's now looked at as the underdog.
So explain a little bit about the political parties there and what their approach has been in these recent weeks.
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu leads the Likud party, which is the conservative wing of one of the most conservative parties, but he also has other rival conservative parties to his right, and he's trying to attract their voters to shore up of the support for Likud, and his primary opposition comes from the left, especially the Labour Party and its coalition partner, which is a center party. And by the most recent polls, that joint party was estimated to have about 25 seats in the 120-seat Knesset to Netanyahu's approximately 22. So it'll be interesting to see what the voters actually decide today.
So the Knesset, of course, is the Israeli parliament. If Netanyahu were to be ousted, what would that mean for Middle Eastern relations, and as well as the politics in that region, as well as our relations with Israel?
Well, if he's outed and the Labor comes in, Labor has promised to focus more on internal social and economic issues rather than security issues. And that could lower the temperature between Israel and the U.S. on the Iran nuclear issue. Labor also was much more supportive of negotiations with the Palestinians, whereas Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially ruled that out because of the opposition of Hamas, which has a stranglehold on Gaza. So if Netanyahu is ousted, then the whole complexion of Israeli policy could change overnight.
I've heard that the Obama administration actually has a political team trying to work for the defeat of Netanyahu. Have you heard anything like that?
I think there were political consultants and pollsters that worked for President Obama during at least one of his campaigns, and some of them have turned up in Israel, but I'm not sure that that was at the direction of the president. They may have migrated there because that's where the elections are.
Very interesting election. We'll be watching it closely. Jim Philiips with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Pope Francis offers prayers and comfort to those suffering in Nigeria. The Holy Father sent a letter to the bishops of Nigeria expressing his closeness to them and their people. He laments, quote, violent forms of extremism and fundamentalism, forcing so many people to leave their homes. Francis encouraged Nigerian bishops to build up a culture of encounter with Christ. Ethnic, social, and religion-based violence, including kidnapping and murder, has plagued Nigeria for decades. A group of clergy and lay Catholics in Chile call on Pope Francis to rescind the appointment of a bishop. They claim Juan Barros Madrid covered up for a priest who abused altar boys in the 1980s and 90s. The group sent a letter to the papal nuncio in Chile, but there's been no response yet from the Vatican or the bishop. Madrid is due to take over as Bishop of Osorno March 21st. The search for victims of December's Air Asia crash is winding down tonight. Indonesian authorities say today is the last day search teams will look for remains and wreckage. Families of the victims who still haven't been found plan to meet with Air Asia officials. They're expected to ask the airline to fund a further search. 162 people on board the plane were killed when it crashed into the Java Sea off Indonesia's coast. Ukraine's president is urging Western leaders to increase sanctions against Russia. Petro Poroshenko says the truce with pro-Russian separatists is not working. Meanwhile, more than 1 million children have been without shelter, nutrition, or school. Wyatt Goolsby has more.
These are the children of war. Using sticks as guns, they shoot imaginary bullets at their enemies across the front line. And if they're lucky, they get to hold a real weapon. In this government-held village in eastern Ukraine, the signs of war are everywhere, from the craters caused by the shelling to abandoned buildings. This boy, only 11, says he once got caught in the crossfire and a bullet tore through his clothing. Fighting has dropped dramatically since a ceasefire was signed last month, but the scars of war remain. This bomb shelter is still housing residents.
How can a little child react when windows are being shattered by explosions? At the slightest sound of shots, she runs to me scared, saying, "Mom, people are shooting."
In rebel-held territory, the story is pretty much the same, but with the roles reversed. Here, the children see the Ukrainian soldiers as the bad guys. This 12-year-old says she has no pity for the Ukrainian soldiers. She says she understands they're human, but they kill people, she says. The United Nations estimates that some 1.7 million Ukrainian children have been harmed due to the conflict between the government and the pro-Russian rebels. The director of the children's home says some of her youngsters have actually suffered. She says the first blow came when they were orphaned or abandoned by their original parents. The second happened when they were dumped by their new families because the Ukrainian government stopped paying benefits to foster families in rebel-controlled areas. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the Irish Prime Minister brings some green to the White House on this St. Patrick's Day. And the Archbishop of Pompeii prepares for the Pope's visit to a Marian shrine in his diocese this weekend. Today we remember the patron saint of Ireland. As a teenager, Patrick was captured by Irish raiders, taken to Ireland where he lived as a slave for about 6 years. Finally, he escaped, returned to England, was ordained a priest and then a bishop. Patrick returned to Ireland as a missionary to convert an entire nation. Here in the U.S., on the south lawn of the White House, the fountain has been dyed green. The Obamas started this in 2009 to connect with the tradition in their hometown. Of course, green dye is poured into the Chicago River each year for St. Patrick's Day. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and President Obama hosts Irish Prime Minister Edna Kenny in what's become a St. Patrick's Day tradition at the White House. The two leaders discussed trade, security, and Europe's economy. They celebrated Irish immigration to America, then jointly urged Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reforms.
We shared the view that one of the great strengths of the United States has always been its willingness to welcome new immigrants to our shores. That's what's made us unique and special.
The President and Prime Minister also met with some members of Congress for a St. Patty's Day Capitol Hill luncheon. Father Hugh Clifford joining us from Rome. He's with the Pontifical Irish College there. Happy St. Patrick's Day, Father. Tell us about a tradition in today's Mass honoring the patron saint of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yes, we Irish celebrated together today in St. Patrick's Church, but every second year we go between St. Patrick's Church and St. Isidore's Church, because St. Isidore's was where Father Luke Wadding, a famous Irish Franciscan, lived, and back in the 1600s he lobbied the Holy See to get the Feast of St. Patrick put on as a feast on the universal calendar of the Church, and so it was first celebrated at St. Isidore's back in the early 1600s, and the Irish have kept the tradition going ever since, and as you know, it has spread all around the world in the meantime.
In fact, it's become quite secularized. It's really caught on with Catholics and non-Catholics, Irish and non-Irish. Why do you think that is?
Well, I suppose two things: the Irish missionary movement and immigration. The missionaries have taken the faith all over the world, and therefore St. Patrick was dear to the heart of so many people everywhere. And then immigration, the Irish have gone in so many places, especially in the United States and in Britain, and taken the Feast of St. Patrick with them. Unfortunately, yes, it has got a little bit secularized at times, and people can forget the reason for the celebrations, and maybe that's where the Church comes in to keep St. Patrick in mind as well, that he is the reason, and the faith that he brought in the Trinity is the reason for the celebration.
So with all the partying going on with green beer and shamrock shapes, what do you and the other members there at the Irish Pontifical College hope that we all remember about St. Patrick on this, his feast day?
Well, I hope we remember his evangelizing zeal, that he was a man who came away from his own country in Wales. Even though he had been held in captivity in Ireland later, he felt the call back to bring the faith to the Irish. So he's a figure of evangelization, of sharing the faith. He's also maybe a good model for the new evangelization now, that we would have the courage to take the faith out, even to make links with the natural religiosity or spirituality of people, to try to bring them the full way to Christ. St. Patrick can be a great model to remind us that we must bring everybody to Jesus and become in communion with God the Holy Trinity.
Well, that puts our feast day in perspective. From the Pontifical Irish College in Rome, Father Hugh Clifford, thank you for joining us, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you very much, Brian, and happy St. Patrick's Day to your viewers as well.
All right. And Pope Francis travels to Naples for a quick one-day visit on Saturday. He will stop briefly in nearby Pompeii for a moment of prayer at a Marian shrine. The Archbishop of Pompeii shares the significance of that gesture.
The city of Mary, Pompeii, will be the gateway of prayer for this new encounter of the Pope with our land. The road that leads to Mary is a fertile land for every pontificate, all the more for the Pope that does not take step of his travels in the world without first relying on Mary.
Pope Francis will venerate the relics of St. Januarius during his Naples visit. He'll also meet with the sick before returning to the Vatican. Up next, the Holy Father warns against closing doors, turning away those who are worn down by their mistakes. And the so-called personal trainer app for your soul may help you to make a better confession. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday evening, March 17th. Happy Feast of St. Patrick. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis reminds us today we can't close the door on those seeking Christ through the church. In today's homily, he says some who want to come back to the church may hear, "You've made mistakes and you can't come." He says some Christians are experts at shutting people out. But Francis says Christ not only welcomes people back, he goes to find people. The Holy Father ended today's homily with a prayer of conversion to the mercy of Jesus. The Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City supports Utah's new anti-discrimination law passed last week. It was hailed as a compromise between gay rights advocates and the Mormon Church. It adds sexual orientation and gender identity to a list of protected groups. The law makes it illegal to discriminate in employment and housing decisions. It also allows people to express religious or moral beliefs in the workplace without retribution. Religious organizations are exempt from the law. The diocese says, quote, "If we believe we are all created and loved by our God, we can do nothing less than support a bill that protects individuals from discrimination when seeking a place to live or a means of supporting themselves." His Excellency Bishop John Wester of the Diocese of Salt Lake City joining us by Skype from Salt Lake City today. And Bishop Wester, this bipartisan bill is supported by the Mormons as well as the Catholic diocese and, of course, the gay lesbian community there. Why this coalition?
Well, the coalition was really not something that was intentional. Actually, it was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that made an announcement about 3 weeks or so ago that they wanted to have a bill that would protect religious liberty and rights as well as the rights of LGBT persons. And so they got that message out there. Our state legislature took up the challenge, you might say, and went forward with that. So that's basically how it came about. Once they got the bill, SB 296, then we responded to it as the Catholic diocese.
So obviously, as followers of Jesus, we are not to judge or discriminate against people, but how is discrimination defined in this bill, and might it force Catholics into doing things that they would find against their conscience?
Definitely not, in my opinion. In this particular bill, that's what's, I believe, unique about it. It's different than any other you might find, either the ENDA bill on the federal level or other state legislatures. This bill simply says that in terms of employment and housing, that we will not discriminate. But there's language that's very clear there. For example, if you have 4 units or less, then you're exempt from this. And it's only somebody who obviously is making a living out of renting space, et cetera. And it's only limited to the housing and employment. It doesn't in no way says that we agree or disagree with the behavior. That's not at all part of what this is about. It's simply saying that all persons have these rights not to be discriminated against, particularly in areas of housing, employment, medical care, education, et cetera.
So no one could be forced to, say, provide flowers or photography for a gay wedding if they find that morally objectionable?
The language in there, of course, this will have to, the test is always in the pudding. We'll have to see how this plays out. But as we see this particular bill, that's correct. Somebody can, but they use words like reasonable. In other words, that if somebody thought that the practice of their religion was being reasonably blocked or somehow thwarted, then they're protected. So that's where that's always going to be an area for people to discuss whether or not making a cake is blocking a person's religious practice.
All right, Salt Lake City Bishop John Wester joining us from Salt Lake City. Your Excellency, thank you so much for clarifying the Catholic stance on this bill and for joining us today.
You're most welcome. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Of course, St. Patrick's Day falls during the penitential season of Lent. That means making a good confession, and now there is an app for that. Catherine Szeltner reports.
In the smartphone world, there are apps for prayer and apps for fitness. Now there's one that's exercise for your soul.
Over the years, gone to confession many, many times, and when you come out, you're supposed to amend your life before you come back. And at times, I haven't done that. I've sinned again in the same way, the same weakness.
Andrew Wyrick grew frustrated with his confessions, so he took his graphic design and tech skills and did something about it. Wyrick created the Sinner to Saint app and launched it on Ash Wednesday last year. It was here where Andrew developed his app, using technology to strengthen souls. He developed it with 7 priests from the Arlington, Virginia diocese. Sinner to Saint includes 21-day soul exercises.
So you would select that.
All right.
And then it would actually take you to your soul dashboard.
There are prayers, reflections, and scripture readings to strengthen your spiritual and mental discipline. Clayton Barassa, a self-proclaimed late bloomer Catholic, says Sinner to Saint helps him put more thought into confession.
Narrow down my sins, but kind of call them out, call my sins out on the spot and shine a light on them so I can get rid of them and actually do something so I don't have to go back next week, oh, Father, I did it again.
For every sin, there's an opposite virtue. For pride, you can grow in humility. For greed, generosity. Virtues that help alleviate temptations.
We shouldn't just strive for holiness during Lent, but we should strive for holiness all year round. And becoming a saint, it is kind of a daunting task, but it is definitely achievable.
And this app may help bring you closer to that halo with each swipe, tap, and click. Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, Catherine, I'm working on it. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Good night, and may God bless you.